We are back with more Tuesday Weekend for you. All right, this segment is kind of two parts to it. First, well, let's start with this. It is a list of things that I've created to not do when somebody else has to clean up with or after you in their jobs. And the first thing I have on this list is something that I personally used to do to Nick all the time. And that is I would take my drink coasters and rip them into tiny pieces because especially when I'm out drinking, I like something to do with my hands. And I apologize. I know you were very patient with me as a patron when did that to you.
Well, I had a system though. I had a system. As soon as you started doing that, I'm like, okay, fine. So I put a stack of coasters down, put your drink down, usually a beer on a coaster. And then I put another coaster down and you would not even notice that you were tearing it, but tearing all the stuff over the coaster. When the coaster get full, I put it back down and you just go back to tearing coasters.
See, I mean, or if you're going to tear coasters, at least be considerate about it and try to contain your mess. So, but things, and now sure, this might be a little bit more ballroom specific, but I know their bars have parties, so you get them too sometimes, but glitter and confetti. Don't do it. Just don't. You know,
that's just kind of like letting everyone know that you were there 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Because it's still going to be there.
In the dance floor that I set up in the ballroom and the creases, you know, because it's big panels and kind of the connector spots of the panels, that's where all that glitter gets jammed in there. And there are some pieces that I recognize from specific parties when I started 2 years ago, yes. And not just that, but also think when you have your centerpiece on the table, the little sprinkle stuff around the, you know, like just, it will get into the carpet. It will have to be vacuumed up. It's annoying as hell.
I also enjoy when they do the whole full setup and everything and bring all their stuff in and all that and take like 4 hours to set a room up, which would take us, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then they just leave it. Yep. And you're just like, what do you want us to do? Oh, we'll come back and get it. I'm like, so you want us to take all this down and box it for you and hold it for you? And they're like, yeah. I'm just like, sure. You'll have it tomorrow. And after tomorrow, we're throwing it away. And they never come back. We would just put the boxes up, leave them in the bar upstairs because I'd be open the next night and I'd come in and they're like, I just throw the boxes away.
Stuff. Yeah. This one I had this weekend, balloons plus children. I mean, I love balloons. I've got some right over there. I'm not going to bring them over. Once one balloon pops, then the kids remember that balloons pop and that's cool. And especially the balloons with shit in them, either confetti or the little like paper discs, whatever. Because again, they get all over the place. And it is best if you just don't bring them in. But if you absolutely have to, watch the kids around them. You know, I don't know. I don't even know how to suggest going about that one. Bring a box and be like, hey, kids, you could put the balloon in the box and pop it in there and everything, you know.
You may have noticed too that just bringing kids causes, I mean, a child can take a teaspoon of rice and spread it over 15 square yards.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
But also it was never great. But since COVID, adults sit down and they seem to think that it's the kids are the staff's problem.
Right.
I've literally me and a band manager had to take two kids by the arm from the upstairs area where I work down to their table downstairs because they were bothering people upstairs. And we got there, like, well, what's wrong? It's like, well, your children are upstairs bothering tables up there. Oh, they're fine. It's like, my manager's like, no, they're not fine. Here's your check. You have to leave. Yeah. They're like, well, this is not our fault. And it's like, yes, they're your children. It is your fault.
No,
that's a common occurrence.
I overall like children or like kids as individuals. I'm very proud of my favorite uncle status, and I work hard to keep that up. But groups of kids, I didn't take a banquet manager job in a casino because I like babysitting gaggles of children.
Right.
Which actually leads me into the next one I wanted to mention is candy. I'm specifically calling out quinceañeras, but I've seen it in other kids events where you have the candy table. And you know what? The glass jar with the Twizzlers that they just pull out, great. Those I like. Give the little pair of tongs and you have your little bowl and you eat the jelly beans or whatever. Fine. Some will get on the floor, but whatever. Wrapped candy, okay. Because it does.
The wrappers still end up everywhere.
It keeps the mess down, but I'll have Snickers wrappers all over.
Yeah.
Suckers are gross because once it's been in the kid's mouth, it will then go on the floor, and I should not need to put a pair of gloves on to keep my floor clean. But the worst offender to me is gum. And I've seen this. I'm not even calling out the kids here. I'm calling out adults because I've seen this too many times where you go out for a smoke break, you put a piece of gum in your mouth, and then it will wind up in one of two places.
Under the bar.
Under the bar, like on the underside of the table, or on the floor, will get ground into the carpet forever. And I mean, sure, maybe you're a responsible gum chewer who thinks, well, I keep the wrapper and I make sure that I dispose of it properly. But do you think that the sugar high group of 7-year-olds are going to do that? They are not so thoughtful. So maybe just don't bring the gum in the first place. Like that. Just
well, and the same. I've had adults do that as well. Like they've sat at the bar taking gum out of their mouth. I'm saying, "How are you doing today?" And they take the gum out and put it underneath the bar, and I'm just like, the look of incredulation on my face mirrors that of Lee Trevino from the movie Happy Gilmore. Just shaking my head, no, like I can't believe I just saw you.
Can I just cut you off here? Yeah.
Well, I've had a standard thing for that for years now. If I see someone do that while I'm talking, I'm like, "Did you just put gum in my bar?" "Oh, sorry." And I'm like, "Obviously you're not. Take it off." They're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Reach under there and get the gum off my bar." I'm like, "Well, there's a lot down there." I'm like, "That being said, I've got a paint scraper. You can get rid of all the gum and I can serve you, or you can leave." And that's your choices.
Because how difficult is it to say, "Hey, can I get one of those cocktail napkins?" And
well, you mean what the responsible adults do?
Yeah, one of those.
Like, "Hey, can I get a napkin?" I'm like, "Absolutely." And they put their gum in it. I have another napkin in my hand. I'm like, "Put the napkin
grab
back
that up,
thank you," and
it's gone. And then it is not a problem anymore.
No, it never was at that point. But when you see a full grown adult do that, and you're just like,
who raised
can't serve you.
It wasn't my mom that raised you. That's for sure.
Yeah,
those are all annoying. Try to keep your messes to a minimum if somebody else has to come clean up after you.
Now, my thing as a bartender is when someone decides that their finished cocktail glass is now a trash can.
Oh, sure. And everything goes in
there. The picks go in, something goes in, their gum goes in there. They'll take the napkin it's on, pick the glass up, ball up the napkin, put it in the glass, where I'm just like, why do you think the napkin's in the first place? Then they'll slide the glass, and if they're sitting where I'm in front of my well, they'll slide after. I'm like, do not put a dirty glass where I'm making drinks for other customers.
Right.
They're just like, oh, I'm like, yeah, I know you didn't know.
Just don't.
Also, don't do this. Don't make me the trash man.
Because the trash has to go into the trash. The ice that's still in the glass needs to go into the slop bucket or into the sink or whatever.
Because then the slop bucket goes into something that it melts into that has a filter to take the water and everything else. And when you throw all that in there, the filter gets full and then the water doesn't go. And it gets worse and worse as you go along.
I have, back when I was one of the front of house managing gigs I had in New York City, the back bar sink, I've never seen a sink more effectively clogged. And it was coffee stirs and then the grounds, because whoever was making coffee, whoever's Sidework it was to make coffee for the back bar, would kind of, rinse it out, rinse the filter holder. I'm sure there's a name for that, but rinse it out, kind of pour it in there. And sometimes stirs would fall in there. And the coffee grounds would basically just perfectly pack it all in. Like I had to basically pull the entire U-bend out.
Yeah, I had
very effective.
I was working at a bar in downtown Salt Lake, and the service bar was actually separate from the rest of the main bar, which is kind of odd, but that's just how the place was set up. And I was working service bar one night, and the drain started backing up, and I'm like, okay, so I go get gloves, get a plunger. It's like, that's just how you do it in bars. We're not going to call a plumber for $200 an hour to unclog it. So I started pulling straws out of the drain, and the straws I was pulling out were red and white striped straws. This bar had been open for probably 6 months. We had never used those straws.
Wow.
And then I talked to the people who had the bar before, and they had never used those straws.
Oh, mercy.
And it had been open 2 years before this place took it over. I found that after cleaning it out. I'm like, I'm really glad I had gloves on for all that. I'm like, I'm cleaning out 4-year-old straws of people who just, drains and sinks, the stuff people put in restaurants. That's when you talk about messes. It's just like, why would you put frosting in a sink?
Yeah, right.
We don't have a garbage disposal.
Why would you pour soup down a sink?
Sink.
Yeah.
Yes. how many people do you work with or have worked with? You're like, I would hate to see their apartment.
Oh, geez. Yes.
Yeah. Like absolutely. When I walk, I see how their bar looks. Okay, it's all done. And I'm like, that's not good. You know?
Yeah. And obviously we haven't even mentioned having to clean up anything that comes out of a person. But if you have to clean up after somebody else's mess in that regard as part of your job, you have my deepest regards. And in fact, getting back to training in the kitchen, there are a number of times I had to clean up blood, and not my own always. They're occasionally my own, but that is really something that at least all of the sous chefs and above need to know how to do, because it's, first of all, you have to throw out all that food, like just the potential for contamination there is so high. You don't want to play that game. So just don't. But again, I mean, it happens in the front of house occasionally too, where puke is probably the most common, but
dude, on your well,
making
drink right on your well into the ice. It's just like, okay, I'm effectively closed for the rest of the night now. I mean, I can clean it, but there's no way I'm going to have to do a lot more than I can do while we're open.
I would just want to set the bar on fire, and we'll build a new one tomorrow.
And the person who did that the one time was a barback who worked there.
Oh,
until that point. Where I'm just like, are you kidding me? He's like, I don't see what the big deal is. I'm like, you work here and you just puked in my well.
You just puked in my well. That's a pretty big deal.
You don't work here anymore.
Yeah, right.
I used to chew. Spitters were always a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but the whole chew thing was just like the whole gum thing. I mean, some of us would have like the double one where there'd be a napkin around it so you couldn't see. You would never do it in a beer bottle and then leave the beer bottle. That's just, you just didn't do that. You never spit on the floor. Dude, Park City, people would walk in and like when I was at Lindsay's, people would walk in and they'd spit on the floor. And I'm like, I am flat out not serving you. Get out of here.
Yeah.
And
you don't know how to be.
Yeah. The trust fund kid would be like, what'd I do? And I'm like, you spit on the floor. So, and I'm like, that's why you have to leave.
You can spit outside on the ground and I'm not going to kick you out, but yeah. Oh, that's just so gross. Well, and really, actually, when I was in Tennessee, because this was just a couple of years ago, I was kind of taken aback by the amount of chewing tobacco that still goes on there. Because, I mean, I'm just used to places where people take their tobacco and cigarette.
Apparently, you can't get it here anymore.
Really? Huh.
I stopped chewing like 5-6 years ago, so I just never paid attention. But I had a guest, and he's like, "I'm gonna go grab a can of Grizzly," and I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And then right after he walked out, I remembered my buddy who still chews Grizzly is from Montana, and his mom sends him Grizzly from Montana because he can't get it here anymore.
Okay.
And then the guy's like, he's like, I went to a smoke shop and I went to 7-Eleven and neither of them had chewing tobacco at all. I guess they do the Z's things now, but the little packets. But those they don't really spit. They're flavored.
There's actually one more little thing on Sidework that I skipped over that I should get back to. And that's, I want to mention in particular the Franklin Chop House in Franklin, Tennessee. They had it was the best system I've seen for assigning Sidework to the servers, because depending on if it was a 5, 6, or 7 server floor, we'd have different lists
you have different,
made up. Yeah. Basically, the first server to arrive gets to choose what they want. So it is, the Sidework was chosen by essentially, if you show up a little bit early, then you get to say, hey, today I'm just doing the biscuits and, refilling the butter, and you have to deal with all the blah, blah, blah. And I think that's fair. All right, sure. Occasionally there was some outside reason why I might be a couple minutes later than usual. And so I'd get, the Sidework that I didn't want, but also, it's kind of incentive to make sure that you are at a minimum on time. I think that was a good way to set it up.
So we, when I worked at the Oyster Bar, I worked in the Oyster Bar, and then there was also the grill. They were connected. Like the Oyster Bar is the private club bar side. In Utah, that's kind of a big deal. The grill was the public side. So 11 servers on one side, 6 servers on the other side. Oyster Bar's open later, so we'd have to close down like all the salad stations and the stuff like that. No one really liked doing Sidework, and we made a truckload of money there. Right. So when I was closer, I started talking to the custodian guy who they hired, Hassan, who's just hilarious and crazy, but he would just like, hey boss, how do I do that? And I'm like, oh, you just have to put all these. So you would pay Hassan. Well, actually, when I was closing, everyone would pay me $10. And then I would give all $10, all the money that I got from Hassan to close down the entire back of the restaurant. Then we had silverware rolls. The grill had a server named Kira. Kira hated serving. Kira loved just sitting in the back and roll silverware rolls. So she would roll them for 10 cents a roll. And on your checkout thing, it's like especially the oyster bar, because we had to do all the closing side work. It's like, do the salad station. It's like, here's $10, have Hassan do it. I'm like, okay, rolls. And I'm like, they'd hand me a note signed by Kira, 80 rolls paid for. That was your check. And I'd be like, and I go in the back, and I mean, she'd be rolling both hands, just like, she'd roll like several hundred rolls a night and make like, I don't know, $100, $150 doing rolls.
Wow.
And she'd just sit back there and read a magazine or talk to people and stuff.
All right.
That was, and it worked.
Sure.
Like the managers for a little while, like had a hard time. Then they realized like they're getting done. They're leaving earlier and everything's done.
Everything's done. Yeah. Yep.
So, okay. Yeah. We'll roll with that. Yeah. That was the only really fun side work place I worked for. Like the other places I've seen, people try to skip on stuff. They fight about it. It's like, that's my side work. And you'd always trade too. That's something I think we should mention is like, for example, again, oyster bar grill, chalkboards, write down, like one of the things was to write down all the specials on the chalkboard.
Right.
My handwriting at most can be compared to Sanskrit.
Yeah, right.
So if I write halibut, it might say halibut, it might say cheese. I don't know what it's going to look like for you. So I would always trade that with someone else.
Why is the special tonight Leon?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yes, I mean, so we would always just like, hey, you do the board. And even then the manager's like, okay, Nick, you're station 5. And I'm like, yep. And I'm like, trade with someone. And I'm like, yep, I know. Yeah. Who wants to do the chalkboard? All right, I got yours. What's yours? Like usually something horrible. I was like, yeah, whatever. As long as I don't have to get up there and write stuff.
I have very legible handwriting. It's very block letters, you know, because I try to make sure that I can be read. It's not the prettiest, but it is always at least legible. We've got one more section coming up of, oh boy, the worst messes that we've seen in restaurants. And oh, we got some good stories here. But stay tuned with us. We will be right back.